A very good morning to you all and welcome to the first AFI Group of Companies webinar on the selection, management and use of MEWPs. My name is Brian Parker and I'm the Business Development Manager, Technical Support. The approximate time of this webinar is going to be around about 40 minutes long, and we will have a Q&A session at the end. So you can see on the right hand side your opportunity to put questions to me, and I'll endeavour to get as many of them done and answered during the time. Okay, so just moving on, a little bit about myself. You can see my education and training there, more focusing on the IPAF. Those of you that don't understand or never heard the term IPAF, International Powered Access Federation, I've been an instructor for around about 18 years, senior instructor for 16 years plus now. During the time I've been with IPAF, I've been a very active member of the training committee, and I've also been the training committee chairman in the past. I've been an ITAG member, which is the International Training Advisory Group. So this is where IPAF look at training not only in the United Kingdom but also globally. And I'm also a current member of the Strategic Forum Plant Safety Group, which was set up by the Construction Plant Hire Association to look at MEWPs in construction, how they're used, and look at how we can reduce risks and use them safer, and members of many other different working groups in the industry. So very quick insight into myself. I'd like to welcome you all this morning. So just moving on, we're going to look at some UK fatal statistics, and if we look at the rings there, you can see on the first one there we had in 2009 a incident where a person was trapped between the scissor lift and the fabric of a building. 2010-11, we had another overhead incident where an operator was trapped between the MEWP and an overhead beam. So them two, what we would typically call a crushing incident. Unfortunately, both of them leading to a fatality. We also had an electrocution where the MEWP made contact with overhead power lines. Then in 2011-2012, we had another electrocution and another trapping incident, crushing incident. So you can see there we've got a bit of common incidents there, so we've got a bit of a pattern developing. We had a suspected fall from a scissor lift, and in 2012-2013 we had another fall, but this time interestingly from a MEWP which had collapsed. So obviously some sort of structural stroke maintenance issues with that, it would appear. Okay, so why have we got this new guidance then? So this new guidance has been introduced by the Health and Safety Executive, and this is what we know as a general information sheet, and it's number 6. Okay, now the precursor to this, the previous one to this one, was a CIS 58, and CIS stood for Construction Information Sheet. So this new document completely revises and brings up to date CIS 58. But CIS 58 was a 6-page document which primarily attempted to address the selection, management and the use of MEWPs. And to a certain extent it did. However, the guidance document itself was felt to lead and aim towards the use of MEWPs in construction activities, and due to this it appeared that some other industries didn't take a lot of notice of it. So like manufacturing, retail, why should I listen to this? It's about construction, etc. So CIS 58 was finished, and they brought in this new document. Now also with CIS 58, since that was introduced, there have been a number of significant development in MEWP safety. Now this not only comes from the design stage from the manufacturers, but also through devices which have been introduced to prevent and hopefully mitigate the risk of trapping and crushing incidents. So kind of highlighting some of the fatalities that I mentioned earlier. So as an industry, we've not stood still. We've looked at ways and means of trying to prevent this. And also there have been some now devices and devices that have been actually introduced to improve the security of MEWPs. And again, some of these I will discuss a little bit later on. So who is this guidance aimed at then? Well, I'm presuming that some of you may be listening to this because you have responsibility for selecting, specifying or managing the use and type of MEWPs that are used on your sites or on your premises. But I'm also mindful that some of you may have safety responsibilities for MEWPs. And clearly there may be some people that are listening on here that are actually users and operators, of the equipment. So, what should my employer be actually providing for me? Now, CIS 58, the original document, wasn't the first type of guidance to actually say that we need to specify the right type of MEWP. As an industry, we've been saying this for years. But unfortunately, even in my experience, all too often the wrong type of machine is specified, And sometimes the only words that higher desks hear is, we'll have the same machine as last time. Now, in most cases, it's fine if you're doing the same task, but what if it's not? What if the characteristics of the machine are different? So, for example, the weight, the height, the width, the length, or the machine's capabilities, so how high it will lift, what up and over capability has it got? What if they're different? What if the operator needs to access another area that's not previously been surveyed? But what if, simply, what if it's a case of the machines that you specified originally is not available? So you're given a machine in lieu. When basically this machine turns up, it might have been what you thought was the same machine, but it might be bigger. So this can bring in a whole new challenges from different manufacturers, different control systems, upper and lower controls. We're thinking about weights of the machine, potential floor loadings, point loadings under wheels, and not to mention things like safety devices and different types and methods of emergency lowering the machines. And these are all factors that you really possibly need to consider, because we might have expected a certain type of machine to arrive only to find it's completely different, and that may have thrown out some of your rescue plans, some of your risk assessments. Okay, so one machine may well be good for one area within the site boundaries, but may not be ideal for where your workers potentially need to access a different area, and this could put them at risk. Now, before you switch off and think I'm trying to sell you, and hire you MEWPs, that is not the case. Okay, I'm talking here about planning and selecting the right type of MEWP for the right type of area that you're working in. And don't forget, sometimes the worker, your employee who is going to go up in the air, may have the best idea and be able to tell you the best MEWP to order, and hire in to keep them, to keep them safe. So let's keep them in the loop too. Ultimately, this guidance brings together a whole host of legislation and good practice for when you're planning and specifying MEWPs. It tells you what you should be considering before you need to gain access to a place of work at height. So remember, this is guidance. It's going to help you and support you in ensuring that you meet your legal requirements. Okay. Now, what devices, types of machines that we've got. So this is going to cover things like vertical type scissor lifts, self-propelled booms, vehicle and trailer mounted booms. Okay. What the guidance does not cover is rail mounted machines, underbridge units, or airport types. So if you need to use them types of machines, by all means listen to this, but then get a different, get some more information on them types of machines too. Okay. Okay, right. So legal side of things. So as well as I do, all right, we have a duty of care not only to ourselves but to others who may be affected by our acts or omissions. So what we're doing and what we don't do. All right. So when we're considering the factor of MEWPs, we need to think of it from an aspect of health and safety. What do we need to do? Well, we've got a duty of care. Everybody. We've got to cover. Ensure that we do not affect the people who are working, alongside us. So we may have our site, we may have our factory, we may have our house build that we're doing, and there's residents or there's other employees or there's pedestrians. We've got to take into account them. We've got to train people. We've got to ensure that we have safe and competent fellow workers, and we've got to make sure that activities are risk assessed. Now, CDM regulations came out in 2015, 6th of April this year, and they replaced the CDM 2007 regulations. I'm not going to go into depth with them, you'll be glad to hear, but one of the things that the CDM, and this is obviously only for people who are working in construction, all right, it does talk about consulting and engaging with workers, which is why I mentioned what I mentioned earlier. We've got to keep the workers involved. Workplaces where workers are consulted and engaged in decisions about health and safety measures are safer and healthier. So if we consult with them, we're going to involve them. We're going to listen to them, take into account what they've said, and then we can actually factor that in when we're making decisions. Therefore, then we're going to get their buy-in. Work at height regulations. We're looking at the suitable work equipment. We need to take into account hierarchies, fall protection hierarchies. In terms of the management of health and safety at work regulations, we need to ensure all tasks are risk assessed. But interestingly, and again, we're going to look at this, we need to plan for an emergency. What emergency? Well, anything could be potentially an emergency. Fire, flooding. But what about rescue from height? What about drowning? These are all factors that we need to take into account. And also the management regs also talk into account about training and competence. So we'll cover that a little bit later on. Pure regulations, okay, so we're looking at safe machinery, selecting the right type of machine, guarding, overturning, maintenance of the equipment, etc. In terms of lower regulations, we would be considering things like thorough examination, so ensuring that it's got its thorough examination, various inspections, and that strength and stability of the machine, and it's been carried out by somebody who's competent to do so. Now the manual handling regulations are in here now because, again, this new document, we've now had new devices designed by third-party people, manufacturers and rental companies for for material handling. So we've got various aspects now where we can handle materials up in the air safely. All right, there's nothing new, they've been going for some time. Okay, but we're trying to mitigate the risk of gaining musculoskeletal disorders for our operators when they're up in the air. So these are the legal obligations, at least, that we have to cover. Not doing it too much here, just the bare minimum here. So what the law actually does require then, the work at height regulations 2005 require that an assessment has to be carried out before we work at height. And it says there, avoid if possible. If we don't go up there, don't. Well, we all know that, okay? But sometimes we just have to get up there. Even though the law does imply if we don't go up there, we shouldn't go up there, in reality, we have to get up there sometimes. But what you must be aware of is what the law then states, and you've got to follow the fall protection hierarchy in order. So when you look at any hierarchy, this is always going to favour measures which protect as many people as possible, firstly. So consider this method over any measure which protects only an individual. So in other words, for example, a guardrail on a machine, okay, on a scissor lift, a boom, a track mount, a truck mount, that's going to protect many people, and that's what we would consider to be collective protection. Right, whereas if we were working on a flat roof, okay, or some other sort of scenario where a harness and lanyard was being used by the user, that would only protect that one user. So, and that's only if they're going to wear it and use it correctly. So if we go back to collective protection, okay, we've got protection on the machines, they're hired in. Some of these machines are able to have their guardrails collapsed. All right, and I'll cover some of that a little bit later on. But why would they be collapsed? Well, getting through low doorways, getting in, under low parts of the building. So we can't stand on there if there's any guardrails collapsed now. Now I've heard of horror stories where people have knelt down. Guardrails have been half collapsed to get underneath something, and they're knelt down on the platform, and there's all sorts of manner of problems there. But what if it's just a question of guardrails, like mid-rails or gates that have actually been physically tied back? Or tied up. Now this is food for thought. If you see that on site and you've seen that happening, you need to jump on that as fast as you possibly can, because that is a not safe activity. Now the work at height regulations do consider that all work at height must be planned, organised in advance by a competent person. Now the IPAF MEWPs for Managers course is a one-day course to train managers effectively how to manage MEWPs. Okay, so we need to look at this and think about this and think, have we got MEWPs managers, people that's trained in your organisation, so that even if you've got one MEWP, you're still putting a person up in the air. We need to have somebody who's trained, because they'll be aware of what requirements there are, all right, and be able to put into place necessary risk assessments and safe systems. So remember, MEWPs are considered a piece of work equipment that can prevent a fall. Now also as well, I mentioned earlier that competent person, it's on the screen there. Now, the new CDM regulations, 2015, again, only appropriate if you're working in construction, speak about people having the necessary skills, knowledge and experience. So they've removed the word competence out of there. So, I'll let you interpret that yourselves and yeah, see what you feel on that change in these few words. Okay, so in a nutshell, MEWPs are considered to be a piece of equipment which can prevent a fall. So the law states that we must use work equipment or other measures to prevent falls where working height cannot be avoided. Now you might be familiar with this new hierarchy picture that's sometimes been shown around, or you may also be aware of the version that's in a triangle. Irrespective of what it is, right, we need to understand about the hierarchy in its order. So falls from height are associated with more fatal and major specified injuries to workers than any other kind of injury. Now, that's fact. In the UK alone, in 2013-2014, falls from height were the most common cause of fatalities and the second most common cause of major specified injuries, accounting for over 567,000 lost working days. So massive figures there of people not being able to go to work because they've fallen from height. Okay, so pure then, okay, or what we know as the provision and use of work equipment. Now this focuses on minimise the risks from using work equipment. Now previously within pure, we've referred to areas such as suitability of the equipment, guarding of dangerous parts of machinery. But interestingly, this new guidance now highlights such areas as ground conditions, slopes, sloping ground, travelling whilst being elevated, potential for drop-offs or changes in level. So quite a different change in tact there from the HSC. They're basically telling you, if you've got these kind of environments around there, you need to consider these, okay? So sometimes the environment in which MEWPs are used will constitute a risk. We could be on good ground 1 minute, then suddenly find ourselves on soft or uneven ground. Now this can have catastrophic consequences if the machine is not designed to be in this type of ground. So to give you a further highlight of this, just consider 1 degree change at the base of the machine. So the chassis changes 1 degree, and what effect that could potentially have on occupants that are in a platform 80, 90, 100 foot up in the air. All right, when you take into account boom sway, or scissor movement, potentially, the weight in the platform, it may be, close to it's overloaded. Okay, so all that can factor in. Now let's just consider driving over, a brick, a curb, dropping off a curb. So, these are serious problems for operators daily. So having experienced an example of this at myself at high height, it's certainly not one for the faint-hearted. Environmental aspects, this covers all sorts of issues, from environmental legislation, but you also need to consider things like noise directives, vibration to the operator. All right, and a lot of the manufacturers are going to cover this, and try and keep the noise levels down and vibration levels down as much as possible. But these are things that you still may need to factor in if your operators use them, for quite a lot of the time. But if we look at environmental now, let's just think about, split hoses and, what about a ruptured fuel or a ruptured hydraulic tank? Okay, I've come across, hydraulic tanks and fuel tanks in that matter that have actually split during the course of the work. So they may have been ran into something, or got caught on something, and the operators moved the machine away, and suddenly you've got the best part of 250 litres of oil spewing out of the hydraulic tank. So what are your spill procedures? Have you got procedures in place that are going to prevent that from getting into any type of water course? Okay, so also as well, under Lola, they do mention obviously the fact that all lifting equipment, you've got to have a thorough examination, and that thorough examination for MEWPs has a maximum interval of 6 months. Okay, we talk about strength and stability, and if you look in the Lola regulations, it will give you a good example and specific legislation what it means there. So we need to ensure that the machine is stable and it's strong enough. And again, we talk about this competent person, so somebody with the training, the knowledge and experience. But remember what CDM said if you're in a construction activity. So some a little bit different take on that. Okay, so in the UK, it may interest you to find that there are over 55,000 MEWPs. Now these are all different from different manufacturers, so different ranges, different types, models. Some have an ability to work only indoors, where some can go outdoors. So each manufacturer, understandably, are attempting to develop new machines with different configurations, different applications and uses all the time. So can't blame them for trying to get a competitive edge on their on the sort of companies that they do business with. So what we're now seeing though is technology working in the manufacturer's favour. And what I mean by this is, instead of relying on the weight of the machine, so heavy, robust equipment, they're now relying on safety systems for various aspects. Okay, so instead of having a really heavy, clunky machine, we've got a lighter weight machine, but it relies on a safety system. Now, it's fair to say in the 20 plus years that I've been involved, with the safe use of MEWPs, technology in the last sort of 5 years or so has moved on somewhat. Okay, and it's moving on still at quite some pace. So what does this mean to you? Well, your employee goes off to be trained, on their IPAF course, or the CSCS or CPCS course, or whatever course they use. They proudly pass, they've received their certification. The challenge now is to be aware of the different types of machine available. So, each manufacturer, when they are actually providing machinery, will provide them with the operator's manual, and the operator's manual is seldomly looked at. It's left in the black box or in the basket, and how often that's pulled out to refer to. is very rare in my experience. Okay, so we go back to the training. They may have been trained on something like a 6 meter boom, or like a 4 meter scissor, and then suddenly they come onto site and they've got a like a 16 meter boom, or a 12 meter scissor. Different animal, different beast. You might be looking at completely different configuration of controls. So when we've been trained on something, just like you jumping in a car or jumping out of your car into a hire car, familiarization. How does the controls work? What do they do? What safety devices are fitted to the machine? How do the emergency lowering controls work? Okay, so these are all things that we should factor in when we're ensuring that operators understand that the machine that we're using. Okay, now the machines may that I'm talking about here may not be representative of the type of MEWPs that you typically use within your business. But in practice, tomorrow when you hire the machine, it might not be the machine that you had thought that was coming. So we need to ensure that we understand these machines. Now the operators, in most cases, will have been made aware of this during whatever training they've received, and they really should be putting into practice that before they get in the machine, they refer to the operator's manual, they carry out their daily checks, they make sure the emergency lowering systems are working, they make sure that the functions of the machine are working, and then they ensure that they understand the dynamics of the machine. Now the reality is though, unfortunately in a lot of cases, the operator will put the key in the machine, turn it to platform and climb in it. Have they done the pre-use checks? Have they done them effectively? Do they know what's what on the machine? Okay, so there's always going to be issues that you need to overcome, and that's the challenge, I guess, in this respect. But then when we're going into an area, what are we actually doing? Are we lifting? Are we bringing machines down, or cladding down, or are we altering? Are we taking out cameras? Are we pointing? There's all sorts of things that we can be doing with a machine up in the area. So before we go up in that platform, there may need to be preparatory work carried out to the ground. All right, which basically means that we ensure the ground is good before we go up in it. What's the access like? Can I actually get in there? Is it and what I mean by that, I don't mean access platform. I mean, is there any arches? Is there any narrow doorways? Is there any sort of turns where I have to get the machine around? Or can I just clearly drive up there and set up and away I go? But what's the ground like? What's the wheel loadings, potential gross weight of the MEWP? So I need to take into account these type of aspects. Some of the biggest MEWPs can actually impose up to 80% of the full weight on one wheel. Or so if I've got potentially a 20-ton MEWP, I could have up to 80% of it on one wheel. So think about some of these subterranean, underground hazards that may well collapse and potentially give way. All right, and obviously we need to consider overhead obstructions and hazards. Now in the UK, we normally see a lot of overhead hazards up in the air, steelwork, trees, but we also see power lines, and sometimes power lines can be confused with telephone wires. I've come across that in my experience. So let's check plans, consult with councils, electricity boards, get it right the first time. You don't even want to consider the potential consequence. Okay, so you've decided on your machine, accepted the fact that this machine is going to be arriving on your site. It's been loaded and you're having it delivered to your location. So this in itself can involve a whole host of manner of issues. Think about the length of the machine, the height of the machine, the width, the weight. This can cause havoc whilst it's being unloaded. Okay, is there room for the transporter to park up and safely unload? Remember that the delivery driver, when they arrive, under many terms and conditions of hire, are acting under your instruction, and therefore you also have a duty of care to them too, as well as your own employees. So loading and unloading, you need to factor in the fact that basically you take care of that person. Look, loading and unloading on a live carriageway is unacceptable in my eyes. We get it all the time. People can't even get the truck into site. Consider a person now trying to unload a machine on site. Okay, and he's got this off here and he's having to take that into site. Just imagine where the basket now will be swinging into the line of traffic, or potentially. Okay, now the guidance also covers lighting conditions, and again, this is on delivery and collection because a lot of the time we're delivering out of hours, delivering dusky conditions or early in the morning. So consider this: there have been a number of unfortunate fatalities to the public over the years. All right, so consider now that that machine's been driven off the or unloaded off the back of the transporter and is now driving it into your site so that you can use it tomorrow. What I now cannot see if I'm a user of the road is that vehicle's lights. So as I'm coming along the road now, unfortunately it's capable I can drive straight up them ramps and onto the back of the truck. Again, I should be looking where we're going, I accept that, but that has actually happened unfortunately. So in most cases, delivery drivers will actually face the oncoming traffic in situations like this. So their lights are visible, beacons, flashing hazard lights, but this isn't always the case, and sometimes there's not space for them to turn around to ensure that happens. So either way, a safe system must be developed and communicated to all users. Before any unloading thing happens, think about ground and overhead hazards. Is there anywhere that can potentially collapse? We come off the back of the truck, suddenly we're imposing all this weight on manhole covers and drains and curbs. Okay, so we've parked the machine up, it's on site, the delivery driver signed it off. Where's he going to leave the key? Or is there a third party or an alternative access control device on the machine, so like a security device, so it cannot be started up without some other means. Okay, so these are all things that we must consider. It is really a question of scale. Sometimes the machine can fit through your front door. Sometimes they are rather large, so we need to factor these in and make sure that we do it safely. Okay, right. Okay, now next part of the guidance that I'm going to look at is storing and charging. So looking at security, we need to secure the machine, and just like I said in the last one, making sure it's safe and not to be able to use by people who are either not trained, authorized, or able to use it. Now recently, even ourselves, we had a MEWP stolen from a site in West Yorkshire. Now the machine was only a very relatively small scissor lift, but once it had been finished with, a truck turned up and basically they picked it up with the HIAB that's on the back of the truck, so like a lorry loader, just basically picked it up and off they went. The following day we came to collect the machine to find that it was no longer there. So thankfully for us, and I would say fortunately, this machine was fitted with our award-winning Smart Zone device. Now the award that we got for Smart Zone basically means that the machine can only be used by trained and authorized operators, but also it has the ability to locate the machine globally. So it's got basically to track and trace the machine. So in the event of theft, like in this situation, we were able to find the machine. And all that happened was a manager turned on his laptop, located the machine, found out where it was, and basically guided the police to the location of the machine. A number of people are probably helping police with their inquiries. But we got our machine back within 48 hours. There are some people are not so fortunate. So the guidance then clearly states that when they're not in use, they must be secured against unauthorized use and stored correctly. So we'd expect, machines lowered, power turned off, brakes applied. So when most mobile platforms are stop, the brakes will automatically stop. All right, but some machines don't have automatic brakes, so we'd have to chock them. It then mentions about recharging a machine in an environment which is protected from the elements. So I agree with that. We don't recharge our machines out in the open if we can help it, with the weather that we have in the UK. All right, but I do really feel that they could have mentioned a little bit more here. The gas given off when the machine is on charge is hydrogen. Okay, so both explosive and flammable. So you've got to consider this. If I'm charging a number of machines or one machine in a small room or in an area which is not very well ventilated, then basically I've got the gas building up in that area, and that could create a fire or an explosion. So that's something that we need to consider in your fire risk assessments or your safety department needs to do when they're charging machines. Remember, at the end of the day, we've got to be mindful of these sort of things. Also as well, the charging leads, be very, very mindful of leads being doubled up. And what I mean by that is one extension into another extension, because all you're doing is doubling the length, but what you're doing is reducing the actual power at the output. So although you might feel that you're going to get a full charge on the machine, you won't. Don't forget as well, things like charging leads, either get damaged, they get run over, and various things there where people, aren't able to charge the machines up properly. So, and lastly, like I say there, the guidance talks about the securing of machines. And I've mentioned that at the start there. One key can fit 3 or 4 different types of machines potentially. If you had 3 or 4 keys with you, all right, there's a very good chance then you could start up a number of machines on site. So in that respect there, once you've off-hired your machine and you haven't damaged it, you haven't caused any problems, it was safe, nobody's been hurt on it, you've left site, all right, unfortunately somebody else can jump on that machine if it hasn't got another method of securing the machine. Okay, so questions to ask before we actually go up in the air. Okay, so what's the ground and the terrain like? Do we need a banksman or a marshaller? At any time are we going to need to wander lead the machine or dog walk the machine? Is the ground capable of taking the weight? What's the ground loadings? So there's a lot of information in this section, and and the scope of this is, it's covering anything from encroaching vehicles down to, and segregation down to the actual ground that we stand our machine on. So I'm going to cover these in isolation briefly, and if you look at ground and terrain, it's going to need a lot of consideration. I mentioned earlier, but also, about some of the ground conditions, but we need to think about things like manhole covers, telecommunication hatches, drains. And then what if we've got more than one? What if they're linked potentially? So one manhole cover to the other manhole cover may be linked. So that could open up a whole warren of underground services, which may be nearer to the service than you first realise. So, again, that, it may collapse. Marshalling or banking a MEWP. Now, first of all, do we really need to marshal the MEWP? Do we really need to bank the MEWP? In some cases, yes. In most cases, most operators can see where they're going. If it is yes, and we do need to marshal it, you may have your own site rules that say that's going to happen. Okay, it's got to be carried out safely. We've got to have good communication, good line of sight, clear directions and signals. Only, in the last couple of years, we've had one serious incident when a MEWP drove over the banksman, resulting in life-changing injuries to that operator. So basically lost the sight of the banksman and then still carried on, I believe, drove over them. Now, wander leading, or sometimes referred to as dog walking. Now, this is necessary when you're not able to stand safely in the platform. So, for example, if we've collapsed the guardrails and we're having to maneuver the machine through a doorway or under a low obstruction, we've got to drop the guardrails. All right. Now, the key here is to ensure it's risk assessed and that operators are familiar with the controls. So what normally happens is, in most situations, we've pulled the pins out to collapse the guardrails, we've dropped the guardrails down, we take the upper control box off and we use it stood on the ground. So effectively, like manoeuvring a large remote controlled toy, or, as we did probably as children. Okay, so we've taken it through a doorway, under a low area, maybe into a sort of, enclosed area. The key here is to ensure that the control box is always orientated round correctly the way the platform is going to work. So the arrows on the chassis match the arrows in the control box. Okay, been a number of incidents over the years, where operators have actually driven the machine over themselves, okay, because they got the controls mixed up the wrong way around. So ground conditions is always going to be a huge part of MEWP setup, because we've got to consider the whole weight of the machine is transmitted through its superstructure to the ground. So whether the machine is set up on wheels, whether it's set up on stabilizers, whether it's set up on outriggers, doesn't really matter. It's immaterial. The ground has got to be sufficient to take the weight in the first place. I've got to drive to that position before I can put my stabilizers down. I've got to drive to that position before I put my outriggers down. So there is new guidance now being released by the Strategic Forum Plant Safety Group on ground conditions. They have released a document. It's over 70 pages plus of information, and it will give you further guidance and reading should you need it or require it. The IPAF website now also has a Ready Reckoner, which is a very useful tool for those people who are planning MEWP activities, and I'd encourage you to have a look at that. And okay, obviously in terms of working up in the air, over obstructions and structures, okay, there are a number of secondary guarding devices available now, which I'll cover a little bit later on. Okay, so just go through this. Some of you may have seen this video. I'll show this at the. I'll let the video do what it needs to do. Okay, so that video was taken off a well-known social site, as you can probably see, and part of me believes that that was potentially set up, but also part of me believes that it was asked that poor gentleman to take that machine off that slab. So all they've done is taken the machine down probably an 8-inch drop. So you can see that when the first two wheels came off there, he almost nosedived into the platform, potentially suffering some facial injuries where he headbutts the control panel. But of course, he's regained himself, and then by the time he's driven the machine off, he then gets the other aspect of there where the front wheels come down, and that's what we got, that boom flick or catapult effect. No harness on, clearly, and he's catapulted out the platform, and that guy's going to be suffering some injuries, and of which I would doubt some serious injuries. You're coming sort of 15 foot down off the ground there, onto hard standing. And if you could hear the video, you can probably hear the person who was videoing it kindly chuckling and giggling. So they're not a joke. These things do have the potential to cause injury. So we need to do this carefully. But that just emphasises just stepping down off an 8-inch curb, and he was lowered down. You now consider what I was meaning about if we're 60-70 foot up in the air. So hopefully you see the reason why I put this video in there for you. Again, if you need to have a look at that, get onto YouTube, onto some of these things. There's lots of things on there where you can use some of these for some of the toolbox talks that you may need to deliver. Okay, right. So let's think about things. So what considerations? I talked about wheels, I talked about outriggers earlier, and clearly stabilizers. So remember, all type of machines, irrespective, are going to put their weight through the wheels, the outriggers or the stabilizers. Now, boom type MEWPs in particular can impose up to 80% of the full weight on one wheel. All right. So what we might find here is though it may display like a boom type platform may display a very large wheel loading or point loading over one wheel. Okay, so or one stabilizer or one outrigger. So what does this mean? But like I said, basically it means that the full weight of the machine may almost likely be taken on that wheel or that outrigger. So basically it's considering the worst case scenario. Okay, so I mentioned earlier about the iPath Ready Reckoner, and there's one picture there from it. Okay, but if you go into it, there's a lot more behind that. So you'll be able to put in the weight of your machine, the type, look at the type of ground, and get an idea of the what type of pad you need to use. So looking at a recent incident over the last sort of couple of years, we had an incident, and this one was taken in the UK. So if I won't start it just yet, but you can see the boom working here. The operator's somewhere up here. We've got a scissor lift working here, and you can see here we've got the site hoardings there. Okay, so basically the guy's now going to be working along. You can see the buses, the traffic. You can see the people going about their daily life, the cars. You can see there's a car at the set of lights there. Okay, waiting for his turn to go through, and away they go. So the boom's now working. You can see the operator up here. He's looking down at the ground. He's trying to check. The wheels are turning, and basically as he starts to turn his wheels and move back, all right, unfortunately for him, something happens. So it's just collapsed into a manhole cover that was covered up by ground, and down it goes onto the ground. You can see all the white stuff come off the basket, so that'll be dust and that sort of stuff from the impact. Now you can see all the people running. Some people clearly ran in the opposite direction, and if you were looking carefully, there was a person very, very nearly crushed by the boom that decided to run away quickly. Secondary incident now, the machine's obviously caught fire. There's smoke coming. Scissor lift's descending. But the reason why I'm allowed to show you this is we use this on our iPath MEWP for Managers course. The guy survived the fall. Okay, so that guy actually eventually lived to tell the tale. All right, so these are some of the considerations. All right, this was because of a manhole cover that was covered up by aggregate and shingle and shale, etc. The HSC actually prosecuted this company £100,000. Now, I mentioned earlier about, we've got a duty of care to others. So you can only imagine now if that had hit a bus or a car or, into another area. All right, so consider that, where that site hoarding was, you're never going to have the ability to cordon off that whole area. But what they got, or partly why they got prosecuted, was due to the actual, the underground services not being clearly marked. All right, so everybody's okay with that? Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so weather, right, so we live in the UK. We need to consider the weather can be unpredictable and it can change at any times. So we can have issues here where MEWPs are either indoor or outdoor. So is the machine rated for wind? Is it got a wind speed on it? If it says 0 ms, 0 meters per second, or 0 mph, miles per hour, it means it should not be used outdoors. It should be used indoors where there's no wind. And many times I see machines that are 0 rated being used outdoors. Okay, so if the thing, it'll blow over effectively. So your manufacturer is not going to support you. Your hire company is not going to support you if something went wrong and the machine blew over. Okay, so if we're expecting people to work outside in the cold and the wet, we need to keep them warm and dry. So be prepared to support people in the appropriate weathers, whether that's cold or whether it's warm. Remember, machines can also work differently when they are cold. Sometimes they won't start, so have they preheated them? What about if it's freezing? What if we're working inside chillers or working inside cold stores, etc. So we're having to take machines in there. So charge time of batteries, we charge our machine up expecting it to last a couple of hours, and it lasts half an hour. But you all know yourselves that even a mobile phone battery, when it's cold, will eat into its battery source very, very quickly. So consider that. Sometimes we have to be in and out very, very quickly. So in terms of wind and we're going to make sure we respect the wind, okay? But we need to measure it with a anemometer. When we're looking at cold stores and cold environments, we need to ensure that people are looked after, and of course the machine is looked after. Okay, so falls, clearly we've had a number of fatalities from falls and serious incidents from falls. Now evidence does suggest that the biggest risk is from using boom type MEWPs. That's why I showed you that video earlier, the guy being ejected from the platform. So boom type MEWP and the catapult effect. All right, so you can see there, obviously from this person, he's traveling over terrain, he's dropping down the terrain, and it's caused that machine to cause the operator to bounce out. So the biggest risk is from boom types, from tip overs, ground condition, drop offs, tipping against something, or even impact from other vehicles. I've put on there snagged. Now we've had a number of incidents over the years where machines have actually got themselves snagged on something. So metal work, steel work, a bolt or a bit of rebar, etc. And the operator has tried to maneuver away, but all they're effectively doing is bowing the machine. Okay, and if you consider what's going to happen once you bow it, get the bow on the machine like a bow and arrow, all right, eventually if it does allow it to release, we're going to get that whip effect. So we're working in boom type platforms, the recommendation is that you always wear some type of fall protection. Okay, and the guidance does also mention about people working in the arboricultural industry. So those of you that are working in tree fellers, trimming trees, bushes, etc. If you're working near or over water, the decision has to be made on whether or not we wear a harness and or a life jacket. So clearly if there's a risk of drowning, then life jackets must be worn. But it is about the depth of the water. We've had incidents where machines have fell into waters or driven into water. And if you've got a harness on, you're going down with it, aren't you? Okay, so we should be wearing the appropriate safety equipment. Okay. There was a campaign quite a few years ago with Clunk Click. So when we're in a boom type platform, wear a full body harness with a short lanyard. Okay, so we're really attaching a lanyard to the anchorage point that's inside the platform. Okay, we do not attach outside. Okay, so just show this little video. We've got a vertical type machine there. I don't think the survey's been done very well, if you ask me, because the machine is only up to the bottom of the window and the guy can't reach the top of the window. So what this person's now doing, he can't reach, and unfortunately takes it upon himself to climb a little bit higher. We can see a little bit there of side force, the machine pushing away from the wall, and unfortunately that person has a very bad day at work. Okay, so in terms of the standards, okay, the preferred option is to use a proprietary system which restrains the occupants in the platform. So we shouldn't use any retractable restraint lanyards unless they are suitable and have been successfully tested in the proposed manner of use. So, there are harness courses available which cover inspections and correct wearing. Now, if in doubt, we should refer to the IPAF harness guide. So we should be seeing operators wearing, EN361 harnesses and EN354 lanyards. Okay. Now, if we look at the boom type guidance, it says they're strongly recommended that a full body harness with an adjustable lanyard to be used to provide work restraint. The lanyard should be adjusted to be as short as possible and may contain an energy absorbing device. So this includes static booms and mobile booms. For vertical lifts, it does say there it's not normally necessary for personnel working from a vertical lift to wear fall protection equipment other than in exceptional circumstances, which would include static verticals, mobile verticals, push around verticals and mass climbing work platforms. Okay, so guidance is there. Feel free to use that and look at that on the IPAF website. Okay, so overhead hazards then. So I mentioned earlier about 2 fatalities through contact or near contact with overhead lines. So if we're going to look at overhead power lines, we need to follow the guidance note 6, which is a GS6 guidance on working close to or near overhead power lines. But we also need to consider, beams and doorways, trees, bridges. What risks do they potentially present? All right, well, clearly there is a risk of crushing or getting, caught between. So what effects could that have on the operator? What effect on the user? What about other people in the platform? But of course, what about the rescuer? So what control measures do you require? Have you got some means of doing that? Have you marked it out? So there are additional MEWP devices now that are available. So we've got a couple of guys working in steelwork there. All right, very close to the steelwork, yeah, look at that. That's an everyday occurrence in the UK. Only one wrong move, and they could be completely, pinned against the controls. So to further highlight this, give you an example here. Okay, so we've got the not looking what he's doing, up he goes, so makes contact with the guardrail, potentially hand injury, or he lowers down the machine and lowers it onto something. So I've seen that happen before. Okay, and of course we've got the operator now that sort of fixated on the controls, making sure he operates the right control, not really aware of his surroundings, lifts the machine up and unfortunately makes contact with the steel beam there. So that would be a crushing injury, or what we would call a sustained involuntary operation. So he can't basically let down because his body, his torso, is pressing on the controls, pushing them away, and effectively he can't actually lower the machine back down. Okay. So trapping and crushing. The previous industry phase was anti-crushing or anti-entrapment devices. Okay, and basically very important subject. Okay, because as we're seeing, as we're putting these people in the machine, the guidance has basically said have duty holders assessed if MEWPs need to be fitted with secondary guarding devices. So although we're referring to the word secondary guarding there, okay, what we have is primary guarding already built into the machines. So those of you who have used a machine before will understand what I'm on about here. To operate any control in the machine, I've either got to put my foot on the foot switch, hold a trigger, press an enable button. That's primary guarding. So it's a two-pronged attack. Okay, so often on some machines, there's collars. I've got to lift the collar up before I can engage the control. So again, primary guarding. So this is why these anti-entrapment devices have now been replaced with the word secondary guarding. Okay. Now in the industry now, this area is seen to have grown somewhat. Okay. So there's some 6 or 7 devices available to try and mitigate against the consequence of trapping or crushing. There are 2 documents that's come out there now. And that one there is the guidance on the secondary guarding devices available to reduce the risk of entrapment injury. And this one here is the best practice guidance for MEWPs, avoiding trapping, crushing injuries to people in the platform. The one on the right, the avoiding trapping, is from the strategic forum. The one on the left is from produced by IPAF. The one on the right, okay, I actually worked on that quite a few years ago on the second part of that document from the operator's point of view. There are two parts to that document. The first part is the management and supervisors, all right, and being able to understand it. And the second part of it is for the operators. So it's very much able to be used as a toolbox talk effectively. Now, even some industries now and some federations have now mandated that boom type MEWPs must be fitted with some type of secondary guarding device if there is a foreseeable risk of crushing or entrapment. So they've made it their own policy now. Okay, so be aware of that if you're not already. Hydraulic ramping. This is built into MEWPs to allow them to both speed up and slow down mechanically. Often operators will not be familiar with the controls and not realize that machines will not stop instantly when the control is released. So, we've driven up to a wall or up to an area, we're expecting it to stop, and it runs on a little bit of time, okay? So that's a ramping time. So imagine now that up in the area and I'm reversing back towards a wall, expecting the machine to stop instantly, and it doesn't, okay? So two documents, I would encourage you to download them. They're free of charge, okay? Look on our website, you'll be able to get these downloaded. Also the one on the right, you can download that from the IPAF website free of charge. Bit of reading for you there. Okay, exiting the platform at height. Now, MEWPs are designed specifically to lift people, okay, and the guidance is given in the code of practice, which is BS 8460, so BS 8460. So specifically designed to lift people to a position where they can carry out the work from the platform and then return to the starting level. They are not intended for the transfer of people from one level to another or exiting the work platform at height. However, Annex B of BS 8460 does state that exiting the platform at height may be only undertaken when a rigorous risk assessment carried out as part of the planning. All right, and it talks about various things, and it considers things like falls, falling objects, tools, sudden movements, potentially additional loads that were imposed on the machine, dynamic effects. So I would encourage you, if your people are climbing out of platforms, I would encourage you to have a look at this guidance and see what it says, because it says once the risks have been assessed, measures should be devised to reduce the risk to an acceptable level, and a method formulated so that a safe system of work can be put in place. People need to understand it. Now, just kind of whet your appetite. There's a new concept now for exiting a platform. This has been approved in the United States and Canada, so this is not currently approved for CE, so we can't use it in the UK. But you can see here one manufacturer's took that to another level. So we've got an operator, you can see he's climbed out the platform and he's got a running line now on that basket. Okay, so I can't say any more than that. Not approved for the UK. Don't do it. All right, it's not something I would encourage you to do at this moment in time. Okay, so trained operators then are responsible for checking the MEWP prior to use. This is a daily check and should be carried out if taking the machine over from one operator to another, or even if we return to a machine after a dinner break. Okay, I know most operators probably won't recheck a machine after they've returned from lunch, but a cautionary walk around the machine to ensure it as it was before they left it would always be worthwhile. All right, so again, how do you record your daily checks? What form are you going to use? Where is it kept? How up to date is it? Is it something that you've found and you've borrowed or you've taken out or something? I would advise you on the left hand side there is a free downloadable example on the resource sections of the IPAF website. Remember, IPAF, the International Powered Access Federation. This document on the left hand side there is free to you. You can see it's got Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday and so on. It's got all the checks that you should be checking, all right, on a MEWP prior to using it. So what's the procedure for if a machine is faulty or potentially develops a fault? Operators who attend an IPAF operators course are taught to isolate it, tag it and report the fault. So let's make sure they push all the e-stops in, remove all the keys and put a big sign on the machine letting others know that the machine is a fault. With regards to examinations, you're probably all aware from what I mentioned earlier that there is a requirement to carry out a thorough examination at intervals not exceeding 6 months. So this must be carried out with a person who has been deemed as competent. Make sure you have evidence of the machine is currently in date. Now, most companies have their own login systems now where you can gain access to service documents, pre-delivery inspections, and thorough examinations. So IPAF training, the guidance clearly states that there is no strict legal requirement to have specific courses for MEWP training, but it does say that there are recognised schemes available. So interestingly though, the guidance mentions trained operators accessing areas where there is a risk of entrapment due to overhead obstructions, and if their initial training is or was sufficient. It mentions that additional training courses are available. So this is where IPAF comes into its own. When I was the chairman of the IPAF training committee, I was tasked with resolving the issue of training for operators working in higher risk environments. So that's where the PAL Plus course was devised. The traditional IPAF operators course is a 1 to 3 days course, but it is common to have a 1-day course which trains operators on 2 machines in 1 day. So with the high number of incidents and some serious incidents, IPAF then listened to the needs of the contractors, hire companies and the HSE and devised the IPAF PAL Plus course, which is specifically aimed at the workers working in these areas. If you're attaching any material handling device to a MEWP, then the guidance also states that you must be trained on its use. The MEWPs for Managers course has seen countless supervisors, managers and safety managers attain this certification. The MEWPs for Managers course has no doubt helped to provide a safer working environment for MEWP operators as managers have become aware of their responsibilities for planning, selecting and the safe use of MEWPs. Again, I was on the IPAF working group back in 2006 on the MEWPs for Managers, and proud to know that the course has made a significant difference to MEWP safety today. Okay, so there's also an IPAF harness course available, and there's also an IPAF website. On the IPAF website, there's a card check. So you've got your persons turn up on site, and you want to check that this card is actually valid and in date. You can put their details in there, and it will actually bring up the person and their training and what date their card expires. Okay, so familiarization then. So before you authorize an operator to operate MEWPs on your site, consider the following. They may be trained on a 30-foot mobile boom or a 19-foot electric mobile vertical scissor. There were 4 operators on the course. Your instructor was with your employees watching and holding their hand and making sure they were safe at all times. Now let's consider things that are potentially important for them to use machines. Training we've got to provide, and we all do provide the training in most cases, but we also must familiarize the operators. A machine-specific familiarization should follow on from basic training and cover instructions and warnings from the manufacturer, what features of that specific model has, what control functions the machine has, what safety devices the machine has, and how and what the emergency lowering procedures do. Let's never forget this is always in the operator's manual, but like I said earlier, it's rarely referred to, often until it's too late. So, who does your familiarization on site? I put these 2 photos on here to give you a bit of size of scale. Okay, so on the left hand side there we've got a 32-meter scissor. Now, apologies for the quality of the picture there, but you can see the size of this operator here. So this is a scissor lift that goes to 32 meters and it has the capability to drive at 32 meters. Whereas now we have a 185-foot boom, all right, and that has the capability to drive 185 foot in the air. Okay, I don't know about you, but I probably couldn't even see the ground from 185 feet. So how can I understand the different terrain, the ground? Okay, not decrying the machine is fabulous. You've got to have procedures in place to make sure that these are used safely. Okay, so we're getting on to emergency rescue plans now. So we need to identify the following. Have we got a nominated person in place who is site-based and on the ground? Now, I'm certain you have good rescue plans in place, and without doubt, some of the most overlooked areas that I have found and I've come across are things like controls not being accessible at ground level. So what I mean by that is the machine has been parked along the side of a wall, okay, and maybe there's materials that are potentially stopping me from getting access to the ground controls. I mentioned earlier, and you saw the video of the slide out deck over an obstruction. So basically that person then, number one, cannot lower the machine because they may be incapacitated, but the person at the ground may not be able to retract the scissor lift deck to be able to get it down. What about the panel not being able to be opened to access hand pumps or emergency pumps at ground level? What if there's no person available? I thought my ground person was there. He wasn't there. Don't know how to operate the ground controls, or the unfortunate situation where they operate the wrong control, believing it to be right, and make the situation worse. So instead of lifting up, they lower down. Instead of tellying out, they telly in. These are all factors that have come across before, where unfortunately people, have done the right thing, thinking I'm going to help them out, and actually made it worse. And that's not to even get into the issues of, the potential panic, stress, or other things that potentially may happen if a rescue is trying to get a colleague down quickly. So we certainly need to ensure that we've got the call out details for the service engineer who's competent and authorised to lower the machine in the event of a malfunction. But we need to ensure that we've got somebody at ground level who's not going to panic under pressure. They understand the controls at ground and they understand the dynamics of the MEWP. They should have been included in the familiarization of the machine, and we should give them opportunity to practice emergency rescue drills, okay, whether that anybody in the platform or not. The picture there on the screen there, incident there quite a few years ago now, where they lowered the primary boom there down onto the actual onto the roof there, and basically all that did was lifted the base of the machine up in the air. That then set the tilt alarm off because the machine thought it was an angle and cut the machine off. The machine wouldn't lift, wouldn't lower, wouldn't rotate. So effectively the operators were stuck up in the air, and this caused quite a bit of issue for the hire company at the time and the manufacturer. And as you can see, situations like it all too easy, to just not realize what's happening. Okay, so to summarize then, we've gone through some statistics and we've looked at why the new guidance was introduced and who it was aimed at. The legal side of things, there's much more legislation that you need to be aware of, but that's the minimum requirements. We've also looked at what we should be looking when we're selecting a MEWP and when we're making sure that the machine is the right type of machine for working in the area that we're going to work in. We've also looked at delivery and collection of the machine, so some of the factors when we're actually collecting and delivering. Remember thinking about security of the machine, because often these machines are dropped off at early hours or late in the day. Refueling and recharging, don't forget about the fire risk assessment. Remember, it's hydrogen gas that's on charge if it's an electric powered machine, all right, but if we're refueling machines, done safely. Ground considerations, weights, point loadings, considering things that can collapse that maybe weren't designed to take the weight of the machine. Falls from height, statistics there, still the single biggest cause of fatals, but we need to ensure that people are wearing the right type of harnesses and lanyards when working from boom type platforms. Overhead, we've looked at some of the issues surrounding this issue, and clearly there are devices out there now, what we call secondary guarding devices, available if we're putting people in the air and we're putting them close to the proximity to overhead obstructions. Remember, the health and safety executive, if you've got an incident like this, they are going to be expecting that you've considered secondary guarding devices. We looked at exiting at height, and again, it happens, we know, all right, it shouldn't be doing, but we've also got now the United States looking at different ways in which we can safely exit at height in different ways. Training, remember, we've got the IPAF course, we've got harnesses course, PAL Plus, the mutual managers course, which would really help those of you who are in a position for managing mobile platforms, and then familiarization. Who's carrying out your familiarization? Remember, just because you've trained them on a small machine doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be particularly good on a larger machine. And lastly, we've looked at rescue planning. And the rescue planning side of things, let's consider them and make sure that we have somebody at the ground who's capable of bringing that machine down should the unfortunate happen. Okay, well, I hope you've enjoyed this first webinar, and we'll now go to the question and answer session. Thank you very much.